This is the London FinTech Podcast, brought to you by your host, Mike Ballerman, bridging the worlds of suits and t-shirts, of finance and technology, bringing you insights, stories, and inspiration from the golden age of opportunity and innovation happening in London right now.
Hi, this is Mike Ballerman, and this is the London FinTech Podcast, episode 237, brought to you in association with Smart at thelistedboard.com, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Tosin Eniolorunda, CEO of Moniepoint, that's spelt M-O-N-I-E point, for any of you Googling it immediately, Africa's largest fintech by transaction volume, brackets $170 billion per annum in case any of you are taking notes, who also happen to have been recently ranked the second fastest growing company in Africa by the Financial Times. So Tosin and Moniepoint have clearly done something well. They provide banking platforms to customers across the continent, and we'll hear more about them in detail in the dessert course. However, for now, what we will focus on is the challenges of growing a company in emerging markets from the initial stages where you find you've got something useful, you've got a bit of product market fit, but you're trying to get yourself to become a large institution. In any market, anywhere in the world, that stage is a challenging one, in particular, avoiding operational problems. We've come across this in many ways before, and it's a sign of the maturing of the fintech scene. Back in the day, if you got your aeroplane off the ground, as it were, and it hadn't hit the trees at the end of the runway, that would be a pretty impressive fintech. Now you need to fly halfway around the world and buy a few more jets and make an airline, as it were. So, there are not that many continents, and the southern one is very icy as far as I know, and not much fintech at all in Antarctica. And thus, there are not many fintechs who have successfully scaled to become the biggest on a continent. So, Tosin's journey should be one of the most unique journeys out there in terms of explaining to us all, in whatever businesses we happen to be, how we can scale any business successfully. Plenty to talk about, so let's get on with the show. Good afternoon, Tosin. Thank you for joining me on the show today.
Hi, Mike. Thank you for having me.
And so, in terms of kicking things off, we were talking about what to talk about as a introductory topic, which was nothing to do with fintech. And you said video games, and I said, yes, I remember Space Invaders, but I think they may have improved a little bit since then. And as I know at various stages in the summer, when I've been a bit bored and have had my foot up due to my podcasting injury, I've tried downloading various games from Google Play, most of which were a bit crappy, actually. So anyway, what's your interest in video games, and which one should I be downloading? And how do you manage to stop playing them in order to actually go and do the day job?
Thanks, Mike. I actually enjoy playing Mortal Kombat. I think growing up, I think when the Mortal Kombat franchise was released, I remember, growing up in Nigeria, leaving school sometimes to go play the game in game centers, kind of running away from school. And, it's one of the moments where I began to enjoy technology, and, perhaps the need to be able to afford such a console for myself was one of the reasons I decided to start working hard, So, and these days, I actually play games a lot. And you will be surprised that games are sweaty. There are certain games that you play that you actually be sweating like you did a workout. And of course, Mortal Kombat is one of them. So I kind of play online. My favorite character is Jax. So for those that don't know Mortal Kombat is a combat game. It's a fighting game where you basically, your aim is to knock out the most life from your opponent. And you do that by throwing punches, throwing kicks, some special moves like fireballs. And the goal is to last your opponent, have more health than your opponent before the time runs out. And you can actually play online. And I actually do play online. I actually enjoy playing the game. I've met a couple of friends through the game. I've made a lot of bond in my organization through the game. It's actually quite an interesting one. And those that play video games, our listeners that play video games will actually understand what I'm saying about how sweaty and addictive video games can be.
Yes, it's an alternative world, isn't it? And talking about your skiving off school and the random things that connect one to technology, I remember going to a Hawkwind concert. I did natural sciences my first year at university. I was doing more subjects than I was doing for A-levels. So I thought that things had gone badly wrong, and I was tossing up between doing physics, which involved 9 o'clock lectures in the morning, which I thought was an outrageous breach of human rights of a student to have to get up for a lecture at 9 o'clock. And I thought about Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic just for something completely different because I was fed up with the sciences, but I decided that'd be hard work. I was choosing between physics and computer science. And of course, all the rational things had gone through my mind. And I went to a Hawkwind concert, and it was really dark, and they had lots of dry ice mist, and they had lots of little flashing dot red lights, in the mist, and that it looked so cool. Yeah. And literally, it was that moment I thought, oh, I'll do the computer stuff. And it's these crazy little things that sort of, your life kind of turns on.
Exactly.
And going back to the video games and joking about the Space Invaders, I still remember the first time I saw Space Invaders, any video game really. I had in the 70s. I had ping pong. You had these two white lines which go up and down. And going back to sweaty palms, if you're playing against your dad or something like that, you want to win, and so at least the palms were sweaty.
Exactly.
But what I found in my little sort of just trying Google Plays out and getting some of them was that a lot of the games have a certain learning curve, and some of them you then work out how to do it.
Yeah.
At which point, and it's a bit like careers actually, we've all had sort of various jobs in our career, and at first it's quite tricky, then you can do it, and then tomorrow you can do it, and then the day after you can do it, and actually lost the interest. So how does that work in Mortal Kombat in terms of the designers of the game keeping somebody like you involved rather than you become a sort of, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu master or whatever the equivalent is in Mortal Kombat, and you can knock everybody out other than people at your level? How's the learning curve keep progressing? Or chess. Yeah. Chess is another example, You can learn chess in an afternoon, but, the grandmasters study 8 hours a day.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, for Mortal Kombat, there are basics, fundamentals on what you need to do. For example, you need to learn movement, how to give enough space between you and your opponents. You need to learn timing. It's called frame data. Essentially, it allows you to know what you can do at what time. An example is if you punch an opponent now and the opponent blocks your punch, it is actually not yet your time. You should not throw another punch because it's the opponent's time to throw the punch. And there are actually some, basic maths there in terms of how much advantage you have, heat advantage, how much stun you have. So you need to understand the frame data. You need to understand how to string together buttons to make a combo. A combo are basically complicated moves where often flashy, where you could more or less kick the opponent up, down, and end it with a fireball. And there's a sequence in which you have to press the buttons, often in a very fast, tightly controlled manner, because if you press it too slow, the moves will not come out. You need to understand the advantages of certain opponents for certain players over the others. So, for example, some are designed to be zoners. A zoner is a character that doesn't need to come fight you physically, but has some form of projectiles that they can throw out to you. So essentially, you need to understand the mechanics of the game. So once you now understand those basics, movements, frame data, timing, how to bring out combos, then you now need to start learning the psychology behind it, because there's actually a psychology and kind of like mind games behind playing people. So it's almost as if you need to be able to anticipate what your opponent is going to do so that you can block that move as well as now punish your opponent. And you now start progressing. So Mortal Kombat also has like an online gaming competition that kind of has seasons. It's called Combat League. It runs for maybe, I think, 30 days. And maybe there's like a 2 weeks break in between, something like that. And you can actually go online and you begin to progress from different level to the next level, starting from the beginner level all the way to the highest level called Elder God. And the way you progress is by beating people, winning points. And the higher you go, the harder it becomes, because there are people who are actually career gamers who are pros, and that's what they do. That's how they earn a living.
So is it embarrassing to ask where you are in Nigeria or the continent of Africa or the entire world? Or are you up there with the sort of elder gods of the Mortal Kombat by now?
I think the highest I have been has been a demigod. A demigod is just before a god, and then you now get to the elder god. It's actually a hustle, and it can actually take your time. So I would say that I don't have that much time to play. So yeah, but it's actually quite a bit of fun. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, this is definitely the first time I've had a demigod on the podcast. I've had lots of really impressive human beings. So maybe next week I'll have Thor or somebody with a hammer. So that's very impressive. So just in terms of your career journey, before we dive into this whole, how do you scale up businesses to be solid and reliable like Mortal Kombat or like Moniepoint, depending on what domain you're in. It's all entrepreneurialism and business after all. How did you go from being a teenager, sort of bunking off school to play Mortal Kombat to not just being a demigod, but also the founder of the second fastest growing company in Africa, according to the Financial Times?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I will say, growing up, I think I've always loved building. While running away from school to play Mortal Kombat, I also ran to go to my uncle's workshop, who used to be like an electronic repairer, essentially repair TVs and radios. So I realized that I was actually very curious to understand how things work, and I began to spend a bit of time with him to understand how electronic items work. And I enjoyed putting electronic components together. I started little by little making bulbs blink regularly using transistors, using an old car battery, and began to read electronic books from there. So essentially I just realized that I loved building. And combining that with a bit of restlessness meant that the way, in addition to playing video games, the next best way I love to spend my spare time, is in attempting to build something and just looking at how cool it is. So I think once I reached my university days, I kind of almost realized that for me to actually be happy, I would love to build something big. And initially I used to think, based on the fact that I used to work in an electronic workshop, it was going to be like some form of hardware company, something like Sony, Samsung. But I think over time it quickly dawned on me that hardware is harder than software, and to actually have a big hardware company, you need more than just the idea and the zeal. You also need supporting industries, supporting infrastructure, which of course growing up in Nigeria didn't really support. And that was also the time that China was fast becoming, the best at manufacturing generally. So the same love of building, I now turned it into software. I remember when my mom got me my first desktop computer and I discovered programming in BASIC.
Which year was that about?
Which year was that? That should have been 1998.
So you were using Windows, I assume?
Of course, I was using Windows 95.
Yeah, Windows 95 is much better than Windows 11, which I've got at the moment, but let's not go down that rabbit hole. Okay, so anyway, so you've spent some decades playing around with computers. You quite rightly worked out that hardware is extremely capital intensive. The margins are actually quite low. And I would kind of say that apart from the odd thing like Tesla, most manufacturing industries are a bit sort of late industrial revolution, really. I mean, I met a chap recently that consults on silicon chip plants, which cost astronomical sums of money. You need 10 billion for a pretty crappy one, and if you're going to be serious, 100 billion. But very different world. However, software, as we all know, is a different world entirely. So you thought about doing something software-y, not least of which is that you can set a business up on your own, and then can join you tomorrow, and that's actually a business. So what was it then, just in terms of, we'll talk about Moniepoint later, what was it about the sort of finance scene or the fintech scene that led you to form Moniepoint 2015? What gap in the market did you see that you thought, people in Nigeria can't do X very easily. Actually, I think that's the problem that's worth me solving, which of course turns into the whole Moniepoint and the whole journey and the initial success, and then the period we'll focus on, which is how you go from initial success to being a substantial company.
Actually, when we formed Moniepoint, we didn't know we were going to do this. So initially in 2015, we formed Team Apt. Team Apt, APT as in aptitude. And that was formed once I left my then employer, which is InterSwitch. So InterSwitch is like FIS Global in the UK, essentially a backbone transaction processor. And immediately after school, I decided to join a software company, mostly because I wanted to learn about the state of the industry. And I felt like if you're going to build something, you need to understand how the industry works. So I joined InterSwitch as an engineer and became an engineering manager, became a product manager. And after spending almost about 5 to 6 years, almost 6 years, I decided it was time to do what I had in mind. I enjoyed my time in InterSwitch, but I was no longer enjoying it at that time. So I reasoned to myself, I probably had a few years to getting married. If that was the best time to do it, if I delayed it, I felt like once I become heavier in that I now have a family, it will become harder to do. And I reasoned to myself that I should go out to do something. Even if it fails, I can always go back with even a better CV, having been a founder that failed. So I decided to do it. And initially, we started by building software solutions for banks. Then up till now, most banks are not yet even strong technology-wise. So we helped them build some of the technology products that they needed for their customers, their retail customers, their merchants, their businesses. We did that between 2015 and about 2019. So it was essentially a contract business. We sold software we had to the banks. They paid us a one-off revenue. We sometimes had a maintenance contract with them. In occasional cases, we deployed and shared revenue with them. And it was an okay business. We probably hired maybe up to 50 people in that time. Probably maybe got a total of about $2 million worth of contract in that time. But I think over time, it was clear to me that this wasn't going to be a very big business, mostly because serving customer banks, the total addressable market and the total amount that banks were willing to spend wasn't very high. And at that point, they considered tech providers back office and did not put a lot of premium on them. They paid very little compared to the revenue that they were making. So it was clear that rather than be a farmer, we should own the value chain. Rather than being the back and providing the raw materials, you should go own your products because that's how you can extract the most margin. So that's the basis in which we decided to pivot in 2019 to now offer those products that we're selling to banks directly to consumers. And that's also what now started the move from original Team Apt to a name change to become Moniepoint. So we launched Moniepoint as a product initially, and the product grew. And we realized that the product itself was now bigger than the original company name, which used to be called Team Apt. And we now renamed Team Apt to Moniepoint.
And we were talking before about surnames, and my family has always been quite generous and had 3 syllables, but your family's been more generous and you had 5 syllables. And listeners will probably have as much problem trying to spell my name as they will yours. But in terms of spelling things, why, just in passing, did you spell it M-O-N-I-E point rather than M-O-N-E-Y point?
Because that's how we could get the domain.
Ah, right. Yes, that's the usual answer. Well, a few weeks ago we had the insurance company Renewal, and obviously renewal.com is too expensive, so they got rnwl.com and just missed out all the vowels. So
Exactly.
Excellent. Well, anyway, I've mentioned that to listeners so they can find you that way. So you had this business that generated, I assume, some organic cash flow, as you say. You grew a business. You saw that was going to be limited in terms of its potentiality. Then you pivoted, but pretty much using the skill set you've got already. And we'll hear more in the dessert course about the products that you're selling to which customers in which market and your future plans. But if we fast forward a bit now, you've got to the stage where you've done your pivot. You've seen, oh, this is going very well. And oh, this is growing fast. So you're very happy. This is really good. And then, which is one of the stages in a growing entrepreneur's life. And then you get to the stage which is that if failure is a bad thing, success can also be quite a challenge, which is every day you've got 10 times as many customers as yesterday. You think, that's nice. Oh, shit. By Wednesday, you go, oh, bloody hell, what do I do now? And then you really get into this phase that you suggested that we dive into, which is the challenge of scaling a business. And I always think of it as turning it from a cottage industry into a business. And actually, I saw something recently about this phrase. I didn't understand where it came from. And one of the examples actually was making buttons. Back in the 18th century and early 19th century, button making was something that women did at home in their houses. You know, the kids are there, they just make buttons and they sell them one by one. And there was a Dorset village that the programme was about, of which 2/3 of the houses are now missing. And sometime in the late 19th century, somebody invented a button-making machine, which is quite a complicated thing to invent. And literally 15,000 people living in Dorset had to flee to the colonies in Australia or America because they were literally starving. You know, so that was what a cottage industry was. Things were made at home, and then industrialisation came along and turned it into factories. So you're going from this kind of cottage industry where you're all doing it yourself to a much larger scale of business all around. So before we dive into the various dimensions of the challenges that other entrepreneurs will face if they meet the same success that you have at some point, it might be worth just giving a little bit of context about emerging markets, which is quite a generalisation because I don't know what's emerging these days. Let's say half the world's emerging market or quarter, it doesn't really matter. But all these places aren't the same. But just basically, and I know you spent quite a bit of time in London, what is the difference between a sort of kind of mature market, as it were, whatever that means, like I don't know, London or America, and a developing market in terms of this phase of the entrepreneur's journey, in terms of the scaling up and operationalising and becoming more of a BMW factory than a cottage industry? What are the particular factors before we go into the factors of a scaling up per se?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, there are a couple actually.
You may have noticed them.
I've noticed that actually. So I think let me start with one category. Let me say infrastructure is the first category. So there are some things that you could take for granted in the developed countries, and it's not the same in emerging markets. An example will be deliveries and shipments, right? Like if, for example, in London, you want to get your car delivered, there are the very well developed world-class delivery companies operating in a competitive market, from the Royal Mail to DPD to Amazon, that a fintech company like us could use to deliver cards to customers. In Nigeria, there are some, but the level of SLA and reach that they will give will not meet our objectives. We, for example, wanted our cards to be delivered under 48 hours, and we wanted to have complete coverage of the whole country. And we had to build our own delivery systems from scratch.
Wow.
We are fortunate that we had some resources all over the countries, though, right, that we could use to leverage for this last mile delivery. But we couldn't just rely on the incumbent delivery systems for the reach and the speed of delivery. That's an example. Another one, for example, is network, which is also under the category of infrastructure, reliability of the network. So if you're building in the UK, for example, you generally have minimum of 4G everywhere. Some places 5G. A lot of places are using fiber Wi-Fi in their homes. So generally, network is fast. Loading speeds are really good. But here, you need to consider that people are using slower internet, which means you need to be careful around the amount of data that your application will require. People need to think about updates because the data is expensive. So when people are downloading updates, they are really thinking about their data and how much it's going to use up. That's another example. Another example will be in another category will be people, right? It's in developed countries, developing countries are often even magnets for emigrations. So you might have talent problems, but oftentimes it's not because you can't find them. It's also because they're just expensive, and there are certain skill sets that you have that are usually in the market. You might just have competition with some other companies, and if you pay top dollar, you find them. In emerging countries, you might not find them. They might not be available. And a skill, for example, is digital customer acquisition, which is the skill set of being able to acquire customers digitally and the discipline of maintaining a customer acquisition cost relative to your lifetime value of the customer, all the mindsets that go into GRP, on ATL marketing, digital marketing, is not a skill set that you will find very readily in emerging markets. And what we have often resorted into is hiring experts to develop some of these skills locally. And that's also because even the people that you have in the emerging market, sometimes, because people are really fungible, people, especially people that have the best skills, can work anywhere in the world. So you will have people being poached all the way from the US, all the way from the UK, all the way from Canada, and are given better opportunities. So you just need to pay world-class rates for you to be able to get such people, and you might not even find them locally.
I was going to say that's one of the things when you were talking. I was thinking of when Gonzalo was on the show recently. Well, actually, he's based in Cambridge, but he spends the summer in Portugal. He's Portuguese. And Renewal, that I'd mentioned, is a virtual company, so they're spread around. And I was wondering to what extent you can use the virtual bit. But of course, forget the word emerging for the moment. If you're in a low-cost-based country, you might be able to find people in Spain or Poland or London that can do virtually all of these things that you need, all this techie stuff, because tech, one of the benefits is you can do it anywhere, and people can be clever, and if they've got a computer, it doesn't really matter. Once they're working from home, they might as well be working from Poland or anywhere. But the challenge there, of course, is the relative costs. In that a burger costs rather more in London than it does in Lagos. So you might well be able to find somebody who you can hire in London. You might even be able to find quite a few people who know about the Nigerian market and those kind of angles as well. But they'll probably want significantly higher salaries. So there's a challenge of using this virtual model when you're in a low cost based country, even if it's emerged, and even if the Wi-Fi works, you've still got this price problem.
Exactly, Mike. And that's what we're realizing now. Like, we're exactly what you have said. We're virtual. And yes, we hire people from Spain. We hire people from Greece. That's another potentially low-cost country. We hire people from, and we're just realizing that a lot more of our highly skilled executives are needing to be recruited outside the country. And we now even have a hub in London. And like you said, we earn locally, right? The revenue base is local. But now you're actually going to need to pay expenses for OPEXs in a foreign market. And what this also now does is kind of increases the bar for scaling, especially for smaller companies, because now you need to actually achieve certain skills for you to be able to afford such OPEXs generally. So that's a challenge for emerging markets generally. And it's also because emigration, as well as the fact that because the markets are not yet as developed, some of those skills that you require are not yet in plentiful supply. Those are the two major reasons.
Yes, I mean, my thought on that one is that it's a very complex topic, the whole emigration and immigration, because the excess immigration that this country has seen compared to its infrastructure means that the cost of living in London is absolutely insane. So one of our overall clan who works in the art world, and they're finding it almost impossible on their salary to get anywhere to live in London. And I did read something some time ago about at some point Nigeria was short of nurses because this darned country over here, which is terrible, just basically extracts resources from West Africa, only this time it's human resources. Let's Nigeria train up these nurses and said, we need another 1 million, something like that, because we don't train them ourselves. So anyway, there's a lot of complex stuff around that, and it causes challenges at both ends, one way and another. So moving on to some of the areas that you found particularly important or maybe challenging at Moniepoint when you were scaling it up. Maybe you'd just like to go through some of the key ones at a relatively overview level, having discussed some of the challenges in emerging markets, about the challenges you found and the sort of difficulties you found and how you solved them.
Yeah. Okay, so another one is credentials and compliance, essentially how to ensure that you set up the necessary control structures internally, financially, compliance-wise, and make sure that you can, as you're becoming bigger, you don't get into trouble. And we learned this the hard way, for example, in scaling up our finance team to meet up with the growth of the organization. And this came as this came in the way of backlogs for reconciliation. The organization grew quickly, transactions grew very quickly. We just simply realized humans, of course, cannot reconcile these transactions. We did not have enough people in the finance team who understood all the different moving components of the organization to ensure that as product was doing the work, as technology was doing the work, it's also being done in the proper way financially. And we now began to play catch-ups. So this is much more, this is not particular to emerging markets. This is more of general scaling, but that's true. But something that can be particular to emerging markets is also compliance, especially the regulator's perspective of what you're doing. So because many of the models that we are doing, oftentimes they are not new. For example, what Moniepoint is doing in the UK, there's SumUp, there's Tide. In the US, there's Square. But our regulators, for example, need to actually now play catch up. And we've been lucky, for example, in Nigeria, they initially took a posture of who are these guys, calm down. But now they've taken an open posture of more like, let us understand what you're doing and we can create an enabling environment. But if you are also somebody who is in the forefront on pushing the pace of innovation, you will inevitably step on regulators' toes. And because regulation naturally doesn't work, is almost like a control function that is opposite to innovation. So one needs to find a way to work very carefully with regulators such that they feel comfortable with what you're doing, as well as also make sure that innovation keeps going on also. That's another thing to think through. So there's also technology scaling. Of course, you will need to scale your technology outside the countries because we certainly don't have Amazon data centers or Google data centers in the country. So what this means is for FX, it means that you will be exposed to FX risks. Nigeria, for example, has been going through tough times on the volatility of the Naira against the US dollar. And this has led to increased technology costs because literally most of our technology costs goes to the cloud infrastructure providers and some of the enterprise software that we use. So this makes it, and also even our point of sales that we purchase, which is the bulk of our expenses. So this makes it hard for you to price your products locally. Expenses move pretty easily because not just because your suppliers are moving the price, but because the exchange rate is volatile. But it's hard for you to move your local prices at the same rate because it's even illegal for you to move local prices to put it in tandem with the exchange rate.
Yes, ultimately, I'd like to see Nigeria applying to join BRICS. I was quite surprised that Ethiopia was the first country in Africa to be, after South Africa, to join the BRICS, because I think the BRICS have got a different idea about all this kind of stuff, and the dollar's a different thing. So yes, so we've discussed challenges like hiring, as you say, the sort of the challenges of finance and reconciliations. I mean, that also applies to hiring and the depth in the marketplace, which is that I know you can't just do this, but if you've got a finance team and it's 10 people one day and it's 40 people the next, it's much easier to hire 30 people in a deeper market. The compliance is a challenge all around the world. I like the way you put it, actually. I've never heard it expressed particularly that way, which is that regulation is almost pointing in the opposite direction of innovation. When you were talking about that, I was thinking about how a lot of innovation, going back to button manufacturers or these kind of things that had happened in this country, there was no regulation. There was no regulation in the city until early 1990s, which is why there was a lot of innovation. And now there is a lot of masses of regulation in this country, regulating everything, and innovation has virtually disappeared. And then one of the challenges in particular, and I don't know how this varies between emerging markets and other markets, is the whole question of trust. Finance is really about trust. If I download some new app, doesn't matter which country I am in the world, I download an app onto my phone, I send it some money, that's a hell of a lot of trust because I might never see that money again, or the app might crash, or, and I've had problems with Revolut and I've had problems with Monzo here. So this applies in technology around the world. But what is the challenge for you on the sort of whole trust point?
Yes, Mark, that's a very insightful question, actually, because it's extremely relevant, even more relevant in the emerging markets, especially because the digital first models that we pursue require low touch, which means you don't have physical branches. And this generally leads to people having really circumspect about using your products. And one of the ways we realized that we were able to scale while still being digital, is literally by employing a massive sales team on the ground. And that's the way. So while we didn't have many branches everywhere that people could see, they could still relate to certain people who could give them some of these products. And that's how we've been able to bridge some of this trust gap. So I think it's a big difference between those two entities. People make purchasing decisions a lot more through what people say. It's also relevant, of course, in developed countries, but you also have things like internet reviews as factors of decision making in developed country. Trust pilot is something, trust reviews are things that people make decisions on. But people make decisions here mostly based on what people tell them. The fact that if anything goes wrong, there's somebody they can go hold and give tons of punches to resolve it. So that's another big difference that you also mentioned there.
Excellent. Well, time's gone by quite quickly, and we could turn this into a whole sort of university course, I'm sure, lasting 8 weeks about all the challenges of doing these things well that you've had to face. But I mean, just to wrap up one on this section before we talk about Moniepoint in more detail, when we were planning the episode, I quite liked your final one, which sadly, going back to the way the world is changing, applies to more dimensions than just entrepreneurialism these days. I was busy about to try and book a sort of a 1 month holiday later in the year. Our favourites going around Southeast Asia, and I was just getting to the stage of thinking about buying airplane tickets, and then I saw the usual bullshit about masks coming back or variants coming back or whatever in America, and the last thing I wanted was to have to go through a whole bunch of processes again about trying to claim back from insurance companies because it all shut down. Hopefully that won't happen, but that's an example of where if you've been bitten by a dog once or twice, as we have on holidays, you see a dog, you're much more nervous than you were before. So as an entrepreneur who's successfully scaling up a business, when you were skiving off school, you were probably not very paranoid other than being caught by the teachers or your mum after skiving off school and playing games. And then as an entrepreneur, you're working hard to make things happen. It's a bit like trying to get a fire going. The fire keeps almost going out and you've got to get up early in the morning and put more sticks on, a few more matches, a bit of rolled newspaper, blow on it to keep it going. But then one day, the fire starts spreading. Oh my God, it's over there. I better put that out. I better put that out. And so I thought your final point I quite liked, which maybe you want to say a little bit about, is that be paranoid.
Yes, be paranoid. It's, there's this saying that the paranoid survives. It's the very nature of the world it's in constant evolution. You simply just cannot rest on your oars. And I thought I was paranoid, but some occurrence happened in the business this year that made me realize that I wasn't even paranoid enough. And this is despite looking through all competition, all the things that can bring down your business. But I skipped one. And by stroke of luck, that one that I skipped became one of the reasons I've had sleepless nights for the last 6 months. And it's one of the reasons why we launched our consumer app. So Moniepoint more essentially started as a business banking offering payment solutions to businesses. But I also knew that there was a risk on the consumer side. And the risk is that somebody can have the business side and have the consumer side and create network effects between the two entities. It's hard to do. And I thought it was going to be hard to do. So I was not paranoid enough. But this year, a black swan happened. The Nigerian central bank went through cashless demonetization, which grew Moniepoint, but also grew competition that had both sides. So competition that had consumer and business, and that led to sleepless nights. And it was an emphasis to me that if there's anything that can go wrong, it will go wrong. Murphy's Law. So one of the biggest challenges of being an entrepreneur is how you can maintain your personal happiness at the same time remain paranoid. It's almost paradoxical for you to be paranoid and be happy at the same time. Maybe Mike has wisdom to give to me on how to get that.
No, I have. You can hire me, and I'll be paranoid for you. Actually, I could do with a trip further south. Well, I was just thinking about that for a number of ways. I mean, the first thing is, trust in Allah, but tie up your camel, and that's a fairly sort of simple metaphor because there's only one rope. But in business as a whole, I was thinking about how the chairman at Climeworks, who was always very relaxed, Lord Rockley, he was one of the later chairmen. And why was he relaxed? I mean, Climeworks have been going around 200 years. Barings Merchant Bank had gone bust, which freaked out this sort of aristocracy who still sort of ran the merchant banks in those days. And he basically hired me, and it's my job to be paranoid. So, if he'd come, anything to woke him up at night, he'd say, "Oh, Mike, there's this, go and sort it out." And not just that, but I proactively, it's a bit like a defence in the military, I'd make sure there's no incursions from any sort of neighbouring areas. So I think, Moniepoint can get to the stage where you hire someone to be paranoid on your behalf, which is outsource anything, especially if it's sort of painful. But we could talk about this endlessly, but I want to hear a little bit about Moniepoint for the listeners. So before we wrap up the show, I'd like to thank all you listeners out there, particularly my listeners in Nigeria and West Africa as a whole, and my brand partners of the podcast. Smart is transforming pensions and retirement worldwide. Their leading-edge retirement tech platform propelled them to success in the UK. Now they're operating on 4 continents and working with partners like Zurich and JP Morgan. Find out more at www.smart.co. Then listedboard.com, your guide to entrepreneurial governance and how you can start making your board an engine of growth today. Okay, so you mentioned Moniepoint a little bit, but I think I'm not so completely clear myself, and maybe the listeners aren't either, about what products you sell to businesses, what products you sell to consumers. Are you just selling in Nigeria at the moment? Are you selling in other countries? So maybe you'd just like to give a little rundown of we sell X, Y, and Z, and then having done that, tell us what you need even more of to be bigger and better tomorrow than you are today.
All right, thanks, Mike. Moniepoint is a digital financial service provider providing banking services, payment services, credit services, and business tools services for businesses, mostly focused on small to medium enterprises. And Moniepoint also provides payment services in form of a digital banking application for consumers. So we have the two sides. On the business side, our main product is a point of sale application, similar to where UK listeners will know Dojo Payments or Sumo. But the point of sale also has a digital bank with it, similar to what a Tide will be in the UK. We also have a payment gateway where businesses can accept payments online. And we have most of our revenue coming from those revenue streams. But we also offer credits for businesses, mostly on the basis of their flows with us. And you could say that the closest business to us around the world would be the like of Square, Block in the US, which does everything. And we also have the consumer side also, which is similar to Cash App in the US also, which allows customers to have a transaction application for them to make payments, for them to bank, bill payments, airtime, then savings also. Today we are present in Nigeria, now Kenya, though Kenya is not yet officially announced, but we've expanded into Kenya through an acquisition. And we are also expanding to more East African countries. So the next couple of years for us will be one in which we expand to more countries. We have the goal to expand into 4 countries by the end of Q2 next year. And we want to also begin to continue to grow our revenue. We have a couple of hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue today. And what we intend to do is to hit $1 billion revenue milestone. And we think we have what it takes. We believe we strongly have what it takes. Moniepoint is a tech-first organization that uses technology to deliver financial services for businesses and consumers. We are backed by investors. One of our investors is the British International Investments. We also have this the FMO, which is the Dutch DFI. We were recently backed by QED, by Nigel Morris, and more recently also backed by Lightrock also. Yeah, we've raised capital in the past. We employ a couple of thousands of people and almost 10,000 salespeople. So it's a pretty large organization.
Well, that's a remarkable, impressive achievement. And I think hearing you say that, to achieve what you achieved anywhere would be an amazing and very rare achievement. But having heard you explain a little bit more about some of the things I hadn't fully thought through, such as just forgetting the word developed or developing, being in a low-cost economy, it's much harder to outsource. So the degree of challenge is that much greater. And I wish you and Moniepoint every success in the future.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. If you're in need of a non-executive or advisory director with deep expertise, experience and contacts in the worlds of both traditional FS and fintech, or unique insight into how to make your board an engine of growth today, contact me at mike@mikeballiman.com. If you just need one-off advice in these areas, via clarity.fm/mikeballiman.
We could sit in a bender all day, watching the firelight dance, watching the firelight dance. We could walk in the mountains before dawn, watching a happy moon ride, watching a happy moon ride. Come away from the city, with the tarmac so dead and the people so sad. Come away from the city, with the faces so grey, with the pain of the everyday. We are wild like the mountains and the trees. Can you see what I mean? Can you see what I mean? We fit in between the earth and the sky. Kiss the city goodbye, wave the city goodbye, wave the city goodbye. The city goodbye. Watch the firelight dance with me. 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 Watch the firelight dance.